Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace upon you all. Welcome this Friday morning on the last day of the conference. We're very happy that you were able to join us, and we look forward to an exciting, interesting, entertaining summit from 9:30 to 1 o'clock. And we hope that you will bear with us and be with us so you can help us shape together where we're going forward in the Gender Summit for the Arab world. The aim of this event is to explore establishing a Gender Summit platform for the Arab world, which would join similar platforms already active in Europe, North America, Asia Pacific, Africa, and Latin America. The Gender Summit was created in 2011 with the aim to enable dialogue and consensus between scientists, gender scholars, policymakers, and stakeholders in science endeavors on the improvements needed where scientific evidence shows unequal quality of research outcomes for women and men, or where results open up new research questions and new applications of science knowledge with benefits for society. This event brings together Arab and international scientists and policymakers to start the dialogue and map out topics that are particularly relevant in the Arab context, as well as those of shared interest for future discussions. I'd like to introduce Her Royal Highness Princess Sumaya to inaugurate the Gender Summit for the Arab world. Please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Your Royal Highness, dear great-uncle, great-great-uncle, Prince Raed. It's a pleasure to have you with us as we launch this Gender Summit, particularly because you're of the other gender. But also, it's a great privilege to see and the support from so many of the men in this room, and I thank you very much for all being here today. I had the privilege just a few short months ago to be in Tokyo when Dr. Miyoko Watanabe very, very kindly and efficiently organized the Tokyo Gender Summit, and I was blown away with what I saw. And there I had the privilege of meeting Elizabeth Pulitzer from Porsche and putting together in a few short months this Gender Summit so that the Arab world can be represented on the family of Gender Summits is something that I am incredibly proud of, because we pulled it off in a very short time. So my thanks go to both of you, but my thanks also go to Dr. Rana Dajani, who in the middle of everything just happened to become a fellow at Harvard University. And so not only had to pack up and leave from the Hashemite University, but travel to Harvard as well and help us organize this today. Everybody has been telling me how pleased they are to see that there are so many sessions dedicated to gender equality throughout the forum. And we kept this one till the last because we know that it'll be the pinnacle, and we hope that in this summit we certainly do reach the pinnacle of what we are trying to achieve through this World Science Forum. So without further ado, I wish you all the very best. I thank the distinguished panelists for speaking this morning, and I hope you will forgive me as I have to go and stick my head into the Science for Diplomacy plenary session as well. But I look forward to seeing you all again this afternoon at the closing. Thank you very much. Thank you.
We're so happy that the Royal Scientific Society and Her Royal Highness Princess Sumaya is backing up and supporting this Gender Summit. But ultimately, the only way we can succeed is when we have everybody at the table, both men and women, scientists and policymakers, and everyone. So we look forward to you to engage with us, and not just only in this session today, and then everybody goes home and does, and we forget about, but even going forward, to email us, to be part of the dialogue as we go further, because we anticipate this to be a mini summit in preparation for the full-fledged summit in the future. So please engage and talk to us. All right, so I'm just going to give you a brief introduction, and I want you to keep in mind in this Gender Summit that it's about gender issues in the context of scientific research and evidence and the relevance and impact of gender, sex as dimensions of research. That is, it is a different framing of gender than human rights. We're not talking about human rights, or cultural equality issues. We're not talking about feminism and those kinds of issues. All right, we're talking how this relates to science. So please bear in mind that approach, that context. I'm just going to give a little introduction just to give you more background so we can set our mind frame on what we mean by the Gender Summit. And these are slides that were very nicely shared by Elizabeth. So this shows that the Gender Summit is a global platform for dialogue between the scientists, gender scholars, and policymakers to examine scientific evidence showing when, why, and how gender issues impact on outcomes. And as you see, there have been a number of gender summits all over the world, and this is the preliminary for the Gender Summit in the Arab world. And I'm going to show you examples of what we mean when we talk about gender equality and gender in research and science. So this shows us some examples of if and how basic biological differences between women and men influence outcomes. So as you can see in one of the examples, that the metabolic profiles of women and men are different, that the pain pathways are different in males and females, but the data is mainly for males. Women mount much stronger immune responses to vaccination than men do. For example, the human papilloma virus vaccination benefits girls and boys, but it's often only given to girls. Most drugs produce different adverse drug effects in women and men, with more dangerous results in women. And women are exposed to more health risks as in their careers than do men. Other examples, if we look of how and if reproduction and maturation of plants can improve agriculture, biodiversity, and income generation opportunities of women, and how that differs between men and women. So as you can see, pollinators improve yields and quality of plant food. Knowing how plants attract pollination can improve these effects. For example, beekeeping as a source of income for women farmers. Diversifying flora attracts pollinators, so flowers as a source of income for women. Understanding pathogen resistance of male and female flowers can also ensure healthy crops without artificial insecticides. So this sexual binary is important, even in plants. Ensuring quality of maize and seed after fertilization can also improve plant resilience. And lastly, sex determination of flowering food plants. For example, the multi-use cacum tree distinguishes between male and female plants and cannot be done until a flower is at least 10 to 17 years old. Another example is the biological, environmental, and societal interactions that determine sustainability of marine ecosystems and women's place in value chains, managing fish stocks and protecting marine biodiversity. Old fish produce lots of high-quality eggs. Bioaccumulation of marine pollutants destroys biodiversity and marine ecosystems. Empowering women through increased participation in aquaculture value chains as well. Women make at least half of the inland fisheries workforce, and health benefits of fish consumption. In some species, males grow faster than other females. So these are points to keep in mind. A last example is the societal and environmental challenges that are not gender neutral. Sustainability is not just about empowerment issues, but about quality of outcomes. So for example, and these are all related to the SDGs. So dirty water kills more women than AIDS and breast cancer. Nobody thought of that. Almost 1 million girls under 5 annually die from diarrheal diseases. Women have 47% higher risk of injury in a car crash than men do, and I'm sure our minister is going to talk about that. Natural disasters make women's survival 4 times less likely than that of men. And 75% of new diseases emerge from animals, and women are at a greater risk of exposure to those animals. Women are at a greater health risk from internal pollution from cooking stoves, and women know more about local plants and their uses than men. So there's always a positive and a negative, the pros and cons of this diversity. And lastly, women and girls spend much more time gathering fuel than men and boys. So how is time spent? So in order to ensure equal outcomes for women and men, we need to close the gap in knowledge. And that's what we're focusing on. And this slide shows the literature on sustainability science that has very little content on gender issues, as you can see in this graph. The SDG index has only a limited recognition of the role of gender differences, if you look at the different SDGs in that context. And lastly, the Lancet's 31 indicators for monitoring health impact of climate change exclude gender, even though, as we've mentioned, that impact on health is well documented. And lastly, empowerment targets do not cover the full impact of gender issues on achieving the SDG targets. Solutions to all 17 SDGs need more gender analysis so that we can devise ways to address them. And lastly, we must work together to create coalitions between research and development communities. We can't work in isolation. This is about interdisciplinary, again, a theme that has been throughout the World Science Forum, to improve quality and impact of knowledge and know-how by systematically including gender analysis in both agendas and in both rhetorics. And so what we're going to do today, to add to the conversation, to the dialogue, is what is the Arab context in this dialogue, in this argument, in this discussion? What does gender imply within the Arab context? What are the gaps within the Arab region? And how do we go forward as a result of this preliminary gender summit in the Arab context? So our discussion is going to be divided into 3 panels. The first panel, which we have up here, are the policy leaders, and they will talk about implementing policy for gender equality in science. Our second panel will be about consist of leading scientists, and they will discuss the role of women and men in advancing culture of change and innovation. And our final panel will be the scientists and the activists, talking about what a scientist, what is their role as decision makers and the difference they can actually make. So to start with our first panel, the policy leaders, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Our first member of the panel is Minister Pandor, who is the Minister of Science and Technology in South Africa. So welcome to you. And then we have our second panelist is Nisreen Barakat, former Minister for Social Affairs. And we have Mark Ferguson, Chief Scientific Advisor to the Government Ireland and Director General for the Science Foundation in Ireland. Then we have Mr. Ernesto Fernandos Polcos, is that how I pronounce it correctly? Sorry, I apologize if I mispronounced it. I forgot to ask you how to pronounce it. Chief of Section Science Policy and Partnerships, Division of Science Policy and Capacity Building, Natural Sciences Sector at UNESCO. And we have former Minister of Transport, Dr. Lina Shbib, and we're so happy that she was able to join us, and we look forward to her valuable input into the panel. So we're going to start by giving each panelist 5 minutes to give us their viewpoint on the issue of gender equality within the Arab region or from their own personal experience. So, and we will start with Minister Pandor, please.
Thank you very much to our chairperson for the kind introduction. Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. I trust that we're going to have as exciting a panel and a session discussion as we've had in the various debates on gender equality and the challenges we're confronted with in a range of societies. I must say it's been very exciting to be in Jordan and to see so many women scientists, especially young women. And I think one of the things we need to confront is perception. Because while indeed it is clear that there are many women scientists in the Arab world, they tend to be invisible to the world. There are also many African women scientists, but they also tend to be invisible. So I think as we contemplate a summit or platform on gender for the Arab world, what we need to do is look at how we might establish a global platform for women scientists so that women get together across the world. And what would the agenda be? I think firstly, the agenda would be to insert gender into science, because as has been very clearly illustrated, when we do our work in developing pharmaceutical products, we're not looking at the full pool of humanity. We're not even, in terms of Africa, looking at the diverse gene pool. I come from South Africa, where we have a very, very diverse genetic pool, apparently one of the most diverse in the world. But it is extremely rare when new pharmaceutical products are created that we examine that gene pool and ensure that the treatments that are developed respond to the genetic variety. And so I do think we need to contemplate how we insert gender into science. And as we make advances in the various interventions that we've developed as policymakers, I'm hopeful that what we're not doing is sometimes what happens when we end inequality among races, that you have black men becoming exactly like white men. And so we are hopeful that as we advance women, as they get scholarships, as they become professors, as they become heads of institutes, they do not forget that it is our anticipation that with the new opportunities available to them, when they get into the laboratory, they'll do something different. When they get to the laboratory, they'll begin to develop frameworks that allow us to more competently assess the progress that we're making with respect to gender equality, that they will gather statistics that are appropriately disaggregated to give us a full picture on society's development. Because one of the things we don't have is the ability, for example, in government, when we develop budgets, we do not have the frameworks to help us understand what proportion of that budget supports women's development. How do you frame your budget policy in order to ensure that you are able to assess that clinics where the majority of patients are women are getting appropriate funding, that you have obstetricians provided to those public health facilities, that you're training sufficient numbers of specialists in the various oncologies that affect women so that women get appropriate treatment. We know in our country that if you monitor women annually for breast cancer, you have a far greater opportunity to identify the presence of cancerous cells early and thus to prevent women actually losing their lives. But if you don't have facilities that women can access, if you don't have equipment that can carry out mammographs in a very, very comfortable way, because it's a fairly painful process, and you tend not to have women innovating new technological products which make it easier to monitor patients and the presence of various cells in their bodies. So for me, the presence of women in science means that the lives of women are altered fundamentally. Of course, we don't want to trap women into only focusing on women, but I hope that their presence in greater and greater numbers mean that we will develop a science capability that will make a difference to women's lives. That's really what we should be striving for as policymakers. So we should have interventions which will particularly target women. We have various grants that we direct at women. We have instruments that we hope women scientists would take up. We have research chairs. We have centers of excellence that we establish. And because our gender lens is sometimes weak, we only realize after the fact that the instruments we created have not benefited women. And so the gender lens is absolutely important. I once had occasion to ask a group of women scientists in New Zealand, how have you dealt with the subject of gender in your country? And they said, oh, we've overcome that years ago. We have provision where if we have family responsibility, if we're to have children in our reproductive years, we have grants which allow someone to replace us in our department, and we can come back to that post. And the fact of having taken such leave doesn't count against you. So I then asked them, how many women heads of science departments are there in New Zealand? And so the person who'd been speaking very enthusiastically said, there we still have a problem. So this gender lens and it looking at every aspect of where we occupy positions is absolutely imperative, because we want women to be deans of science. We want women to be vice chancellors. We want women to be the Nobel Science Prize winners. We can't be talking about Professor Marie Curie all the time. We need to talk about women in the 21st century. So I think it's absolutely imperative that we ensure that we're paying attention to the nature of science that we're doing, and don't be afraid. Focusing your science on a different subject can indeed give you the highest levels of productivity in your particular discipline. So don't be afraid of a gender focus. It's imperative, it's a scarce domain, there are unique findings to be made, there's unique technology to be developed, and there's a wonderful scope of papers that you can publish, which will form a rare stock of knowledge about the world. So I really believe that the matter of gender, Chairperson, is political. It is something we've got to pay attention to. And I believe we can make strides with the women gathered here. And I really look forward to us forming a global community of women in science who will use science for the good, because science should change the world. And I'm hopeful that through our deliberations here, we'll agree that let us begin a movement, a worldwide movement of women, which will ensure we do excellent science and that we as women lead change in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And these are very important initiatives that we should take note of and hopefully carry on going to the future. So thank you very much. I'm going to invite now former Minister of Social Affairs, Nesrine Barakat, to share her perspective.
Thank you, Dr. Rana, Your Highness, Your Excellencies, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for being with us today, and it's a great honor, to be honest, to have this summit here in Jordan. It goes very well with Jordan's vision in building the capacity of a human, and I believe that this country has worked very hard with its great leadership to build on the human capital to start with. And actually my talking points will be around this specific thing, is that are we utilizing the human capital that we have here in Jordan, which we built on largely over the past at least 70 years? I think we are not. And if we are talking about a decision making, and the decision making is really the critical point where you will pave the way for the change. So if the woman is not part of that change and that decision-making process, then there is a problem. And I think we are witnessing this problem today, looking at our economy, looking at the sustainability of the development that we are facing today, where we are heading towards agendas, whether at a national level or international level, where we are trying to assume programs in order to ensure this sustainability. I would like to shed some light on Jordan here. When I looked at the numbers, I did some exercise yesterday trying to look at the women graduate at the bachelor level, at the postgraduate level, and the women in the labor market, where I found that they are actually exceeding men. It's more than 50%, and in specific in scientific fields. When we are talking about science, math, engineering, and medical sciences, they are really by far exceeding men. But when I looked at the labor market, I didn't find her influence, and I didn't find her partnership with the man in the development of this country. Women, they go immediately either to the education or to the social and medical sciences, leaving the space empty, I would say, unbalanced, I would call it, in the other sectors, like the transportation sector, like the construction sector, like the mining sector, and many others. So we have a real problem when we have 34% of those who assume higher education in scientific fields, that they are not continuing their career path in research and science, as the UNESCO showed us that Jordan has been declining, to be honest, in the past 10 years, from 22% and something to around 90%, 19%, sorry. So this is a big issue where we need to tackle and see why the women, they do not assume this role and why they are not there. I believe that when I look at, actually, we had the Global Gender Report, which was issued a few days ago, and it ranked Jordan, when it comes to education for women, as 51% out of 151, rank out of 140 countries. But when we looked at Jordan Global Gender Gap Index, in general, it is 135 rank out of 144. And in economic participation, it is 138 out of 144. And now we are wondering why the economic growth is stagnant, why we are not moving forward, because we are leaving behind all these wonderful scientists, educators, in all walks and different fields that they can add a lot. Actually, also in one of the ILO reports, they were mentioning that if Jordan was able to bridge the gap, the dual gap in entrepreneurship and in economy, in the labor market, they'll be able to increase the GDP by 28%, more than 10 billion US dollar. So she's needed, she's really needed. I think sectors that Jordan is now working on, for fast growing sectors like the ICT, renewable energy, these are very important sectors. They've been witnessing a beautiful growth over the past years. Women are needed there. They can boost that growth in a beautiful matter. Not only this, when they contribute, they'll be able also to increase investment, because the more the value added in any sector, the better it will be to attract investment and quality investment in that sector. The other point which I would like to mention is the issue of having a woman and men in one board of directors is a need, because the perspective will be more balanced and they can see together from different angles. And this is, I witnessed this myself, being a board member in a number of institutions. Actually, while we were discussing some decisions, regulations, even instructions, I was asking, okay, what's the impact on the family? What's the impact on the woman? And it didn't cross their mind, simply. It didn't cross their mind. It's very important. She's needed there because she is part of the solution. She can give the solution. So we cannot assume that we know better. If we didn't have all of us holding hand together to find the proper solutions, then we will not be able to move forward. The last point, which I would like to say, is that any decision has to be made based on evidence. And women scientists, they have to be there as part of any research, of any impact study, whether in the design or the actual implementation, the data collection, or even the analysis, because you will be able to get this evidence, which in turn will improve the quality of the decision. So I thank you again for this beautiful session, and also for looking at it from this perspective, which is an important perspective, that we have a knowledge capital which we want to invest and not to miss this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That was very, very interesting, giving now the Jordanian Arab context. Now, to add to the Jordanian Arab viewpoint, I'm going to invite Minister Lina Shbib, Associate Professor of Faculty of Engineering, to give her viewpoint from her experience.
Good morning, Your Real Highness, Your Excellencies, and honorable guests. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this panel, although I have been, given this in very short notice. So I would just reflect my experience as a former Minister of Transport and also as a Dean of Engineering Faculty in one of the Jordanian private university. Formerly, I used to work also in one of the, or many governmental universities in Jordan, and I will just shed some light on my experience in different aspects. But before, when we are talking about gender equality and all these issues, I believe that it should start from the grassroots, from the family, and it goes to the school, and then the university, and to the workplace in general. So we can't, including, of course, the academia and the research. So we can't just deal with one aspect of the chain and forget the whole process. It is started from, when we are young, when our children are at home, how you are directed your children, in which way. Are you just saying that, you are only a female and that's it, or you have all the opportunities in your future life to be a scientist, to be a politician, to be whatever you would like to be. So this is how I think we should look into this issue. We shouldn't just look at the gaps. It is a process. It should start at early age of life, and it shall continue. So my colleagues has covered many aspects regarding the Jordan situation, and I would like just to highlight things that has not been covered, and look at slight things has been mentioned, which is related to the diversity of the vision when female are introduced. But first, let me introduce some figures related to transportation and engineering, because my background is engineer. For instance, the 25% of engineers registered in Jordan Engineer Association are female. And the number is growing. For instance, in 2016, this proportion for who are registered in engineering association has raised to 35%. So we are increasing in number in engineers, but unfortunately that has not been reflected in the market due to the fact that engineers, need to work on field and to be on site. And many of the engineers, they study the field, but they are reluctant to implement it in reality. And that's really a challenge that we need to face and to work on that. In the decision-making process, even in the Jordan Engineering Association, we only have one member out of 8 in the board, elected one, which also, and it has been until recent where we have just this one member among the 8 members. We have one chair of the engineering chapter who is a female engineer, but the remaining used to be male dominant, and few have been elected even in the committee and at the chapters level. So this is also needs to be addressed. When we go to the transport, for instance, we have seen the slide that shows that women at 45 at higher risk to be involved in accident or in, let's say, high risk of being killed is the better definition, I think, when we are talking about road safety. Unfortunately, in Jordan, maybe it's not unfortunately, it's fortunate in a way and unfortunate in the other way. For instance, the women presence in road traffic accident is only 25%, and that reflects also their presence in traffic in general or in transport. And that's why is that? Because they are less mobile. You know, they have limited mobility, they are not accessing the market as a proper. 14% of the workforce, or for the female who are supposed to be in the workforce, only 14% are female, and the remaining they are staying at home. Staying at home means that they have limited mobility, they are not exist in the traffic, and consequently, you know, their needs in, you know, infrastructure. For instance, you know, having a carriage for a baby is not there, you know, because they are not on the road. If we look into also the design of the vehicle, which is not part, because we are not industry nation, at least for the time being, for cars, you know, all the cars has been designed to meet the male needs rather than the female, and we can feel it as a female when we are driving. You know, we have limited vision how you just, you know, direct your car, and now thanks for the new technology that we have all the sensors and have the camera which make our life easier, but in the old times it was not like that. It was really different perspective. So when we also move to the decision-making process and what kind of policy, our constitution gladly addressed that women and men should have equal opportunities and rights in the country, but still it's a long way to go to implement, you know, what our constitution said. So for instance, you know, at cabinet, currently we have only 10% of we have only 3 female minister, and the remaining are male, 26. So we have 29 cabinet member. So this is an issue. Also, I said that I also now teach in one of the private universities. The proportion of female at a private university where you need to invest more is only 13%, while it is in the public where they tend to invest less, it is 40%. And you can see when you are willing to invest, you will invest more in male rather than in female. And this is another issue I think that we need to, I think, shed some light. And I'm talking about, of course, engineering rather, not, you know, in general. Maybe in other discipline, it's different, but in engineering, this is the case. At governmental level, 46% of the employees are female, but unfortunately, their presence is not at senior level. They are much, much less represented when you are talking about senior position in the government. So if we would like to make a change, we need to look about the recruitment policy, the career development policy, the training and the scholarship policy that would empower women, that would help them to have better opportunity in the future. And on the top of that, we need to look into, you know, the community at large, how to educate our communities to believe in the woman capacity and the skill, and they can do it. You know, always we are in doubt that female cannot do it, even if they are in a position like, you know, the president of university. We have just now one female president out of 31 universities in Jordan, and you can imagine how much this number is really undermine the capacity of the female that exists in the academia at large. So I hope this summit will help in highlight, you know, different issue, and we try to find some means that we can improve the situation in the future. Going back to one last minute or point that I would like to elaborate in what my colleague said. When we have a female representation, which should, I believe, reflect their representation in the community at large, it is not only that because of the household or the family needs, because really she's presenting different perspective by all means, from engineering, from economy, from labor, from legal point of view. You have to think what is the point of view or the perspective from the other side. You can't be only one gender, unigender decision at the room regarding if it is in the academia or a private sector or a governmental sector. By this, I will conclude, and thank you again for inviting me.
All right, thank you very much. That was very, very interesting, shedding light on those important points. And now I'd like to invite Mark Ferguson to come and share with us his perspective. And I'll help you here. This one, right? Is this it? No.
Nope.
No, this one. No, not that one. Where? This one?
This one.
Is it coming up? There we go.
Very good. No problem. Thank you. Very good. Thank you very much, Your Highness. Thank you for inviting me to speak. So I would like to give some practical comments, and in particular, to do two things: to encourage you, number one, to take positive actions, and number two, to do experiments. And so I want to tell you about some of the things that we have done. So Science Foundation Ireland is a competitive research grant funder in Ireland. We are the largest funder, and we fund only into public institutions, universities, institutes of technology, often in collaboration with industry. Thank you very much. Thank you. So we, like all funders, have a problem, that women are underrepresented. So in order to deal with that problem, we've done a number of things. This one? The last button, this one. Wonderful, thank you very much. So the first thing is that we have a gender strategy. That's actually very important. So if you look on our website, you will find out what that strategy is. It tells you what we want to do, it tells you what we want to achieve, and it sets some targets. And I'm not going to go into those in any great detail, but let me tell you, when you set targets, you achieve them. So in 2012, we said that we wanted 25% of all of our grant holders to be women. That's not enough. It needs to be 50%, but actually it was 13%. So when we set it at 25, people said impossible, but guess what? In 2015, we achieved it ahead of schedule, and then we reset the target, and we said it was going to be 30%. And when we achieve 30%, we'll reset it again until it's 50%. So you need to set targets and be clear about what you want to achieve. The strategy itself, which I will not go into, talks about a gender equality across education, about gender role models in the portfolio of jobs, and about addressing gender in science, which has been touched about previously. But what I now want to do is tell you a little bit about an experiment. So here is an interesting experiment. SURGE starts for Starting Investigator Research Grant. It's your very first research grant as an independent researcher. We know that 50% of the PhD students in Ireland are women and 50% are men. So the starting stock is equal. But for 5 years, and 2013 is an example, only 27% of the applications to this program came from women. And the success rate was 27%. So the problem is not the funder. We are not discriminating against people. The problem is we don't get enough applications. So I talked to presidents of universities, and they said these women don't exist. Okay, that's why they're not applying. They don't exist. And I said, that's rubbish. There's 50% PhDs are women, 50% are men. What do you mean they don't exist? Well, they're not good enough. So all these kind of reasons. Now, when in this grant application, we put a cap on each institution, because we only fund about 30 of these a year, we get 6 applications from each institution as a maximum, because we don't want thousands of applications, only to fund 30. And the institution always wants that cap increased. So we did an experiment. In 2015, we said, you can have 12 applications, doubled the cap, but a maximum of 6 of them can be from males. So you can put in 12 females if you want. You can put in 8 females and 4 males if you want, whatever, but you can only put in a maximum of 6 males. You are no worse off than you were before, because that's what you were doing before. 6 men came in. If it is really true that these women don't exist, I expect only to see 6 men. Well, guess what? A miracle happened, and 47% of the applications were women. 47% of the applications were women. We then sent those applications out for review internationally. And we said to the reviewers, we don't care about gender. We don't care about race. We don't care about age. All we care about is how good are the applications. Please tell us the best applications. And we funded 53% women. So it is not that these women were in any way not good enough. So what did this show? It showed, number one, it's an experiment. In 1 year, you can double, go from 27% to nearly 50%, the application and the success rate. But number two, it actually speaks to the science of the difference between women and men. Because when you read the literature, you see that women are more thoughtful, they're probably less assertive in terms of pushing themselves forward, they're more balanced in terms of thinking about, is it really, am I really ready for this yet? Should I do it now? And when I talked to the people who had been successful, they said that it was a fantastic scheme because many of them, for example, had just had children. They were not really clear that they were going to apply for the grant at that stage in their life. They were wondering, you know, if they were good enough, and maybe they'd been out of science for a bit, and maybe they needed another year. And they said, but the people in the university kept hassling us. They said, you need to apply. We really want you to apply. And then we applied, and now it's a year later, because it takes us a year to process applications. And now I really want this, and it's terrific. So it speaks to the science of what sits behind this, and it tells you that you can make a difference even in 1 year. So we're doing other experiments. So for example, Science Foundation Ireland only uses international reviewers. We use nobody from Ireland because we're a small country. But you cannot review for us unless you have done unconscious bias training. And that unconscious bias training is online. It's actually copied from the Royal Society in the UK, adapted from that. It's very quick. But you cannot review for us unless you've immediately before you review the application done the online unconscious bias training module. That's important. We have gender parity in our career role models. And then the third one's a really interesting one. Athena Swan is an initiative started in the UK that's about gender and race equality in higher education institutes. And it really is about a gender audit, and then it's about being gender friendly and making sure that you have things. And it comes in 3 levels, bronze, silver and gold in terms of the awards. So we are the major funder in Ireland, and I'm also a chief scientific advisor. So I got the 2 other major funders, Health Research Board and the Irish Research Council that fund predominantly health and the arts and humanities. And all 3 of us said, if you are an Irish university and you do not have a bronze Athena Swan Award by 2019, we are going to fund nobody in your institution. Nobody. Doesn't matter if you're a Nobel Prize winner, we ain't going to fund you. And furthermore, by 2023, if you don't have a silver award, we ain't going to fund you. So what was the reaction? People say, oh, it's very difficult, blah, blah, blah. Guess what? In 9 months, 3 institutions have got a bronze award. So all the stuff that was really impossible and difficult and couldn't be done, miraculously has happened in less than a year. But you also have to be very clear. Several people said to me, are you really, really clear that in 2019 you won't fund like Professor X, who's a really excellent person, if we don't have a bronze award? And I said, that's a hypothesis that I recommend you do not test, because I am absolutely clear, crystal clear, you ain't getting any money. I don't care where you are. And I would recommend Distinguished Professor X moves to another Irish university that does have this award. So you can drive a change. We've made changes to our grant applications like many other people, flexible working hours, we pay maternity cover. We actually pay for maternity help. We also pay for a firm, which is really interesting. There's a firm in Ireland, this is an idea I got from Google, that has a police-registered set of carers that you can call up and they will come to any house in Ireland within an hour to provide emergency childcare cover. And that's really important because for many professional families where the man and the woman are working, if your child gets sick very suddenly, and that happens to coincide when you have to make a very important presentation, say for a grant or promotion or something, you have a huge conflict because you want to look after your child. Maybe you don't have any close relatives nearby. Maybe you don't have any child care close by and so on. So this is a firm of strangers, which obviously people don't like, but they're vetted by the police, and their business is to provide emergency childcare. So the chances of these people being bad people are quite low, because if they were, their business would be out of business. But it provides a kind of insurance for people. It provides a reassurance. And what I learned from Google is exactly the same as our own experience. Namely, it's knowing that that exists is more important than actually using it. Knowing that if you've got a real problem when the chips are down and you have to make a really important presentation, but unfortunately your child has to go to hospital or taken ill or something like that, that you can make a balanced judgment that says, actually, I can go and do the thing that's important, and I pretty much know that the other thing will be taken care of. You may not do that if you didn't have something important to do and you were able to rearrange, but the confidence of knowing that is actually really important, and it's very important actually for both men and women, because I've been in that position. My wife's a professional person, and I've been in that position where the child has been ill, and you think, how are we going to deal with this? And it always happens when you've got an important meeting. It never happens when you've got nothing to do. So, and then of course we have specific gender disaggregated statistics and targets, and we want to increase the number of women in our peer review process. So I guess all I want to do is I want to leave you the message. You need to do experiments. We are scientists. This is an issue. You should do experiments. It isn't something that takes years. You can actually do something very quickly if you engineer the experiment carefully enough. And positive actions work. Thank you very much.
That was great, giving us examples and way forwards. And I hope many organizations in different countries, since we have a diverse representation here, will adopt these kind, and they'll be contacting you, Mark, to learn more. I'd like to invite Mr. Ernesto Fernandez to give us more examples on how to go forward and maybe setting the framework. Thank you.
Thank you, Rana. I'm just simply Ernesto, that's the easiest. So, good morning everyone. Your Royal Highness, honorable ministers, dear colleagues. I learned a phrase when I was living in Southern Africa, which is all protocol observed. So, I don't know if you use that here, but it's always good to... It's really great to be, although we have a small room, to see it overflowing with people really not being able to stay because of the demand for this gender summit. So, Elizabeth, I think you've hit the jackpot again, and Rana, thank you. The gender summit champions, really, this is going into the right direction. So, at UNESCO, gender is one of our 2 global priorities. Some of you have heard me saying this yesterday. I'm sorry for those, but I want to repeat in this audience in particular the idea that we have at UNESCO 2 global priorities. One is Africa as a continent, as a region, and the second one is gender as an issue, as a challenge globally. So that positions all our programs in orienting it towards these 2 priorities. And in particular, when we talk about, in my particular work on science, technology, innovation policy, gender comes very, very central for inclusive and relevant science, technology, innovation policies. So, however, when we, just to add to that, the gender priority, when we look at the gender priority, and I liked Rana, your initial remarks, that we look into the gender priority from 2 points of view that are complementary. On one side, there is a human rights issue, clearly. There is a human rights issue about gender equality, and then there is the challenge that we need more scientists, more engineers. We need, because that's what our mandate is, to build peace in the minds of men and women through education and science and culture. Well, to do that, we need women to be part of that process, central part. However, when we talk about gender equality in science and engineering, it's difficult. Sometimes we think, well, that's one issue, but really it's not one issue. It's a number of issues. It cannot be, it's a complex set of issues, and we've heard from all the speakers this morning that it's a diverse issue of diversity. It's a clear, it's a set of issues that also cannot be addressed by one policy. We cannot think about having, I mean, we have one gender policy, but that gender equality policy in science and technology is actually a mix of policies or a complex set of policy instruments that address different parameters of this of the gender equality issue. And we've heard about that today, quite a good number of examples in different areas. And we have also heard about indicators. We've given a few figures by the different speakers, and those indicators give us a clear idea about this diversity in policies that we need to apply and that we need to think about. Because we've heard that there is parity frequently. And again, parity is not equality. We have heard that there are more women than men studying in certain disciplines. If we just take that indicator, we would say, okay, let's go home, let's go to another session, to the other session that is being discussed in next door, because if we mistake parity for equality, in some fields we don't have anything else to do. However, we see and we got those examples through also the minister, for instance, about the horizontal inequalities, the inequalities by discipline. And in particular, the case of engineering, and I would add the case of ICTs, no, as one very, we've been talking about how ICTs, we have had the plenary sessions about the digital transformations, and the digital transformation seems to be in the hands of men, and that's clearly not the desired future that we're looking at. So we need to focus on that those horizontal inequalities. And we've been also talking about vertical inequalities, about the career development, about the fact that at the beginning of the career there are more women, and at the end, on the top levels, there are more men. So when we look at those inequalities, our parity indicators stop giving us any useful information for policies. And this, we need to be clear. Sometimes it's frequent that when we come to a country, we talk to a minister who tells us, no, but there is no gender issue here because we have parity. We have more women than men studying engineering. Well, yes, we heard from the minister. Where are they in the workforce? So if we don't look at the whole picture, we will really miss the point in terms of policies. And this is a bit one of the strong messages that I think we got from all the participants in this table. So, but then the question is, so if there is this mix of policies, what are those? What are those policies that we need? What are the type of policies? And I would start with one differentiation of policies. One is those policies that are actually oriented towards gender equality. And I think Mark presented some of them. But then there is a set of policies that actually have a differential gender impact, where those are not directly gender equality policies, but that have built in a differential gender impact in favor or against gender equality, and we need to look into those too. So when we have the fellowships, and you changed in your experiment, Mark, you showed how that differential gender impact was built into the policy. You were not talking about the gender equality policy when you were talking about your program of small grants. This was not the gender equality policy, but you had to build in the gender equality component to have a positive differential gender impact. And this is something very important. Sometimes you don't need a gender equality policy for something. You need to make sure that the differential impact is positive. So the second point around this is, well, what is the set of policies that we need? How do we know? I was telling Rana this morning that we were facing a challenge in one of our projects, the SAGA project on STEM and gender advancement, that we needed to do a gap analysis of gender equality policies in science and engineering. And how do you do a gap analysis without really knowing what the whole set of possible policies is to see what is missing? So how do we know what is missing if we cannot categorize the whole set? So there we developed classification. Oh, I left the publications there, but the gender objective goals that we have as a list, as a classification of different objectives. We have 7 big objectives, and they were actually referred to in this table. That it starts at the global culture and stereotypes and norms. The second one is about primary and secondary education. The third one is about higher education. The fourth one is about careers of scientists and engineers. The fifth one is about the content, and we had quite some discussion today about that. That is a very, very important part, both in terms of the biological differences that you mentioned, Rana, and about the gender perspective that was also very widely discussed. Then the sixth one is the involvement in policy making, the need for women to be more and equally present in policy making in science and technology, and to make sure that there is a science, gender lens in the science and technology and innovation policy. So both approaches in policymaking. And the seventh, with is again very important to remember, is about entrepreneurship and innovation, where again the gender balance already there. There is no parity whatsoever, and we have seen the latest cases in Silicon Valley around that. So we really need to analyze all those questions, all those 7 objectives. We are analyzing them separately in order to understand what different policies, which objectives they actually address. We're creating a database of policies. So we will contact Mark to give us his experiments, but also Minister Pandor and all the countries about what policies they are implementing for gender equality in science, technology, and innovation, to create a database of practices. Hopefully good practices. We were not going to be able to assess all the quality of those practices, but that database on a platform that we call GoSpin will be available open access for countries to see, and they will be linked to these objectives, so that when you want to have a policy to solve one particular problem, you will be able to look for a policy that actually addresses that problem, not another problem that you were not intended to solve through this process. So, but in the second part of the challenge is the indicator. So how do we measure this? And how can we, sometimes we measure with some indicator. Sometimes we say that we're looking for the keys just under the light, yeah, because we have the light there. We lost it somewhere else, but that's where we have the light to look for the keys. Well, we're doing that frequently in terms of indicators. We're using the parity indicators to think about equality. We have to be very careful. And so we developed a toolkit of indicators that actually include many of the examples that were given here, but we're systematizing that into a toolkit that countries can implement as a system, as a global overall picture of statistics and indicators. So in a nutshell, I'm not doing a commercial here. I want to show you that all these examples, we can learn a lot from the examples that we've been hearing, but that it's very important that we systematize this, so that so that countries have the tools to look into this also from different contexts, because I'm sure that we would all want to have the policies that Mark has shown us, but of course we have to have the money and we have to have the cultural context for doing that. So we have to look into this with this eye that let us see the different contexts and how we can implement the different policies. So yeah, just thanking again everyone for your attention. I'm feel really humbled to be in this panel with such a distinguished group, and thank you very much. I'm looking forward to the questions.
So we had a set of questions that I think many of them have been addressed. We've been given examples of policies that have been introduced to advance women positions in science and what was the impact of that. We've had what would policymakers think of as needed as gender policy action that they would like to introduce within their different capacities. And I want to pose the third question to my panel, is what kind of support you as leaders in general need that would enable you to make the improvements needed? So this is an open question to the panel. What kind of support do you need? So we as an audience can think collectively of that, and those who are hearing us or will later learn about what we're doing, they can help support you in your endeavors. And I'm leaving it open who would like to answer that question from the panel. You have, there are speakers at the table, if you could use those. Thank you.
And I think the sincere and genuine implementation of regulation towards the gender balance has to be implemented at the government level. So it's not a matter of just saying that we have equal rights. It's a matter of genuinely to implement this issue in practice. And I also would say that some interventions are really needed. Like, for example, the quota, and maybe the quota in some cases, people may argue whether this is bias or not bias. I do believe that it is really needed. And I'm here taking an example of Jordan. When we introduced it at the political level, we've been able to let women access positions that they were not being able to access it before. And what we are missing today is the private sector presence there. If something that maybe I would like, if I have the authority to change, is to enforce quota at the private sector level when it comes to organizations, institutions, associations, research organizations, universities. It is a mean, in my view, to enable women move forward. And when you talked about the culture, it's a changing matter. The more you implement, the more you have them, the culture will change. And the study says that if women are perceived as a worker colleague, a co-worker, when they are in the workspace more than 30%, then they do perceive them as a colleague. I believe this positive bias is really needed to pave the way forward. And personally, I experienced it in a program for upgrading a modernization industry, where we give extra bias, if you like, to female industrialists in their projects and in their companies. It moved really the engagement forward. And to the extent that a different quality of products started to penetrate the market and the industry. I believe that this is sincerely needed. Thank you.
Yes. Minister Pandor.
Thank you very much. I think from my perspective as a minister, it's very important for me to have the support of the scientific community. And so in whatever policy I would adopt, I must ensure that that policy is not at the expense of scientific excellence. So that's very important. And so you do need the support of the community. But you also have to be ready to have little battles where necessary. Because I often say that, you know, when you've had a situation of deep social oppression, such as we had under apartheid in South Africa, those who oppress and who've benefited from power believe they are deserving of leadership. So they have an inherent notion of superiority. And those who've been oppressed, because of many decades of oppression, come to lack confidence and believe they cannot do certain things. So they almost have an inherent inferiority complex. So you're contending with these two forces. As a minister, you have to imbue confidence and quality performance in those who've come to be caused to lack it, but also a sense of humility and readiness to collaborate and share experience, developed over years from those with the superior sense of their ability. So as a minister, you've got to balance all of this, because you want to advance, but not at the cost of scientific excellence. So it's a matter of how do you bring these competing elements together so that you achieve, your objective of quality and excellent science.
Thank you. That's a very important perspective that sometimes people overlook. Thank you. Mark, you were going to comment?
So I was just going to make two comments, one on the private sector. So there are very good studies from McKinsey and others that show that companies that have a more diverse board are more profitable. And by a more diverse board, that means men and women, it means people from different races and so on. And actually, that makes perfect sense. If you have a board that consists of people who are just like you, you do not get a different perspective. And therefore, it's very important that you have diversity within the board so that you gather that perspective. And there are very good studies in gender sector that show that the way that men and women think are different. And that has a good evolutionary basis. Men tend to be much more less thoughtful, more proactive. They tend to, just say, yes, let's go do it, and never mind what the evidence is, and of course I can do it. Women are much more thoughtful. And if you think about that, and you go back to hunter-gatherer societies or whatever, there is a good evolutionary basis for that. And you actually need that. I love women on my board because they're much more thoughtful, and they put into place some of my more aggressive people who would have us run off and do something without actually thinking about it. So I think that's really important to look at the literature. It's also really important to look at the literature, and I don't like quotas, I have to say, but I do like positive action. And positive action, I think, is important for overcoming the innate underconfidence that Minister Pandor spoke about, and that is in the literature, where women tend to be more thoughtful and think, maybe it's not quite for me yet, maybe I should just hold off another year and so on. And that's why I think being positive about it and putting a positive incentive. I mean, I can tell you two interesting things about that Irish experiment that I didn't tell you about. The first was that in all our other programs where we did nothing, the percentage of female applicants went up. In all our other programs. Why? Because the word got out in the scientific community, the funder's looking for a woman, okay? And we want the funds, so we better find some women. So there was a kind of positive effect that rippled out from that particular activity. And the second thing that I think is really important was there was no change in the quality. Okay, when we did the review, we said please disregard everything except the quality of the science. And I think that's really, really important. But what was important was the mindset change in the university leaders, which was, we don't see these women. I genuinely believe they were not discriminating. I just genuinely believe they were invisible, a bit like the minister said, and they didn't see them. And now they positively had to go and find them in order to be able to fulfill the target of getting the maximum number of applications into us. So if you change the mindset to a positive one, where you don't think of things as a problem but as a positive attribution, I actually think that's better than a quota. I actually think it's better to say in the private sector, I would say anybody who owns shares in a company that doesn't have a diverse board should agitate, because you're basically losing money. The bottom line is you are not making as much money as if you had a diverse board, because that's what the data show, and they're overwhelmingly clear. They're very good studies.
Thank you very much. Would do you want to comment, Ernesto, please?
Yes, thank you. When you ask about what support I would like to have for policy making, my first and genetic response to that is evidence. No, so that's what comes first, and I think in this case is clearly gender, sex disaggregated data, but also other types of information that help us making decisions, or at least drafting or preparing actions. However, there is another factor that I would like to bring in, which is I have needed and I had is support in terms of programming, in terms of gender programming, on how you include your gender lens, your gender perspective into the programming of activities of your university, ministries, research institute, how to do that. And I think that that's also something that is a type of support that could contribute to actually coming up with the ideas and knowing how to implement them. Thanks.
Oh, thank you. Minister?
Thank you. If I may comment, about this positive discrimination, either in terms of quota or in terms of, encourage more female, I think, on board or other activity. I think the key issue is to look that, give the female whatever, their right to have the proper job if she has the right qualification. So we are not just seeking, to exist wherever because we are only female. We would like to be there because we are qualified enough to be there. And this is what we would like to, I think, promote in order and to have the support, trust. We need to have this kind of belief that female can do it because they are qualified enough to do it. And that's, I think, how we can help ourselves and to help our community in large. Thank you.
All right, this was a great panel. I mean, every word they said, I think, was important, so I don't know how to summarize it unless I repeat the whole panel discussion again. So I think it's all very important. And I just want to thank them for their contribution and sharing of their different experiences, expertise, and they've pointed us in certain directions, prioritizing, I think, what is important, what kind of support is needed. But I also want to point out for everyone to keep an eye open, panelists and members of the audience, to what are the commonalities, right, all over the world, and what are the specificities in the Arabic context. So, because we don't want to make an Arab summit that is a copy of another summit in Latin America or Europe. We want to try to dissect now what is specific to the region and what is common, so we can build upon the common and create solutions for those that are specific. So with that, I'm going to leave you. First, let's thank our panelists very much. Yes.
Make an announcement. At 10 a.m. this morning, in the UNESCO General Conference in Paris, Dr. Audrey Azoulay from France is going to be the new UNESCO Director General. I think this summit should send a congratulatory message to her. Sorry. And then the other thing is that I think, as Ernesto said, the last 8 years, Irina Bokova has been very supportive of gender. And she is stepping down on the 14th of November, and then Audrey is taking over 15th of November. I think this summit should send a congratulatory message or thank you message to Irina Bokova for supporting gender. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, I know you are closing the session down, but this is a session about policy of women in science, Arab women in science. I am Hilal Hinay from the Research Council of Oman. And obviously, as research councils, we sort of hurt to see a lot of our brain power not effectively utilized in society, especially in research. At the Global Research Council, this was one of the hot issues that was discussed. And we tried to see why is this 80-20, 80 at the beginning, 20 at the end of being professors or heads of departments or heads of universities. And unfortunately, some of our policies that are meant to support women are hindering that process. In Oman, and I think some of the European countries as well, women can take up to 3 years maternity leave without pay. Take a researcher 3 years out of her track, and she could never come back. We tried to see how can we actually amend this. We want to give them the right if they want to choose. But unfortunately, that would also take them out of track. One of the recommendations that we came up with, and we tried to see, can we push it into policy, in Oman at least? Can we give women the right to choose if they want to take a part-time job during that 3 years gap, so that she is not taken away from her track. She still can go for 4 hours instead of 8 hours to the university. She can still be part of the team. She can still participate and participate effectively during that period of time. Unfortunately, it was mentioned that the funds, the retirement funds, would not agree to that. And this is not only in our world, this is also in the US, in Europe. Retirement funds need some sort of payment. And we simply say that the contribution of bringing up children is a payment towards society. And that should be taken into consideration. And she should be given the right to have a full retirement during that period of time. So in terms of policy, if there is any recommendation towards this, where women can have the right, if they choose to take a part-time job during the 3 years post sort of maternity period, they can do so, and maybe extend it up to 6 years if they wish.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that comment. Actually, that's very, very important. I think one of our problems or challenges is that we only value one sort of work, one form of work, which is working in a proper workforce. When a woman, and even men in some cases, are actually doing childcare, and what we advocate, and hopefully it will come out of the summit, is that we want to put a value. Part of the GDP is time spent taking care of children, because that's the most valuable thing we can do for our countries, is helping bring up the next generation. So absolutely. And add to that, I think Mark has a wonderful scheme for how to get women back into the workforce without compromising it. But because of time, I advise you all during the coffee break to talk to Mark, because I think his scheme is wonderful. But I'm going to leave you now with our second panel, because we're on a time, because we want to benefit from all our wonderful speakers. So thank you very much for our panel, and I invite panel 2 to the stage.